Alrighty, so looks like I'm live. I'll give it a few minutes, see if we get some people on board. One's already in the live stream, I guess. So yeah, let me know, where are you from? Hey, there you go. So you're nice and early. Nice to see you again. Well, at least you know what I mean. Hello, hi from India. Hi. Cool. Okay, guys. Well, this is a completely unscheduled session, but that's fine. I have some time on my hands, so why not? And hey, we got some people from down under. Awesome. Hey, Mark, how you doing? Alrighty. So we got some people from India. We got some people from Australia. We got any other countries at the moment? Yes, no, not yet. Maybe. Okay. All right, guys, let's get started. So, as you probably saw in the title, UK, yeah, I know, yeah, there we go. So, as you saw in the title, what I wanted to talk about today is workflow, for a couple of reasons. I review a lot of portfolios, I talk to a lot of 3D artists, and it seems that everybody has their own workflow, and they have very specific reasons why they do things in that order or in that way, right? So yeah, what I wanted to talk about is my workflow, how I do things, and answer questions you might have about how you do things and what the difference is between one method and the other, and what the advantages are, and that kind of stuff. Okay. So yeah, before we dive in, any specific questions or things, or what you want to mention, or there you go. Yeah, and then we'll dive in, and that will give us a minute or so for people to jump on board. Like I said, completely unscheduled, but nevertheless really cool. Already have 16 people on board here. Nice. And yeah, let's see. Okay. I'm just going to get started, guys. Here we go. Alrighty, so workflow. Is it okay to use pirated software? No, it's not okay. But then again, that's my opinion, right? I don't think it's okay at all, for the simple reason that A, there is free software available that you can use, and B, if you're using software and not paying for it, keep in mind that people working in those companies have to get paid in order for them to keep their job, right? So basically, you want to get paid for your work, and they want to get paid for theirs. Hope that makes sense. Yeah. Is the workflow the same for all studios? No, absolutely not. Blender or Maya, I'll get into that. What's up from Nepal or Nepal? I don't know how you pronounce that. Yeah, so when it comes to workflow, and this is going to be a lot of information, so keep up. Yeah, okay. So let's say you are modeling something for, I don't know, a mobile game. The key element to a mobile game is usually poly count restrictions or budgets. So you can't go overboard on the poly count because of the capacity of the system or the platform. So you're going to model low poly. Now, the choice there is to just model low poly and just use the model UV'd and textured as a low poly. Or you can go in there and take your low poly and then use baked normal maps on it, that kind of stuff. The key element here, though, is, like I said, the budget for the poly count. Then you have the option to go from high poly to low poly, or from low poly to high poly. And I'm going to get into the individual software types and that kind of stuff as well. Yeah. Now, I personally typically make my base models in Maya. Low poly, or I block out my models in Maya, and then I will take it into ZBrush to basically take that low poly and go from there towards a high poly model, add all the detail and so forth and so on. And once I have both the low poly EUV'd and a color ID map made for that, take it into ZBrush, make my high poly model, take it both into Substance Painter, bake my high poly maps and so forth, and put them on the low poly, and then I'm done. Yeah. That is probably a workflow familiar to you. I hope it is. If not, ask me. And hey, Vincenzo. And then I want to talk about, what makes sense from an organic and a hard surface point of view, what will go first, what will go second, and that kind of stuff. So put some questions in here, right? Hey, Nestor, how you doing, buddy? So Nestor has been following my videos like forever. I think, 8 years, maybe, something like that. And although I don't recall ever talking to Nestor face to face, I don't think so. I do know that Nestor comments on every video pretty much I ever make, and I really appreciate that. Okay, guys, so any questions you might have about workflow, any things you would like to know, any problem you have with the workflow, any question about workflow in the industry, that kind of thing, yeah? Let's see, my mind became like animation is only for rich people because the fee is very high in like animation mentor, animation school, etc. Are there other ways to learn animation? Yes, of course. First of all, if you split animation into the technical aspect and the non-technical aspect, technical aspect is fairly easy to learn on YouTube, right? There are a bunch of tutorials out there. Doesn't cost you a penny. That will teach you the technical skills, how to keyframe, how to do all that stuff. But then the real hard part of animation is being able to read people, observe people as they walk, as they talk, as they sit, as they get up, and so forth. They teach you that in school as well, but this is more like a life experience. And I would say the key to becoming a successful animator is to be dedicated and to really want to do it. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Harry. How are you? Animation is a very long journey. Yes, I agree. So, guys, any questions about workflow? Any questions about low to high poly workflow, high to low poly workflow, retopo options, tessellation, topology? Yeah, okay, so my workflow, I literally just explained that. I don't know if you were on just yet. I would say that it mainly determines, your workflow is usually based on the end use of whatever you're making, okay? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you are, I don't know, modeling something that's going to be rigged and animated. Then your workflow is really lined up towards who's ever next in the pipeline, right? The person rigging the model has certain requirements for your model, so you need to be aware, right? The animator might have certain requirements for the rigger and for the modeler because of that animation. If you're working freelance and you're working just by yourself, working on, I don't know, final beauty patch renders for products, it's basically whatever you want, right? As long as the end result looks good. So guys, any questions about the workflow at all? Are there any plugins for Ritopo? Well, not plugins per se anymore, because I don't know what software you work in, but Maya right now has a built-in feature for remeshing and for Ritopo. So that's really good. And if you want to use a standalone application for Ritopo outside of Maya, I personally use TopoGun, and TopoGun is perfect. Let's see. Nestor saying, what's the hard surface for? Do you mean hard surface model, or do you mean high poly mesh? Because a lot of people confuse the two. Limited time, 1 year, 1.5 years after that, I'll look for a job for modeling. I'm giving my best daily 7 to 8 hours a day, pressure modeling. How much chance of a job? Okay. First of all, getting hired as a 3D artist, there's a lot more to it than just being able to model, right? if you are spending literally 7 to 8 hours a day on modeling, you should be at a skill level where you should be able to be hired as a fresher within a year, right? The thing is, though, it will allow you to model, but there's so much more to the 3D artist role than just modeling, right? It's being part of a team, understanding the business, understanding the commercial aspects of it, understanding storylines, storyboards, mood boards, all of that stuff. So there's a long, long way. Yeah. Okay, so that's a good question here. Is it compulsory to retopo a model after exporting from ZBrush? Yes and no, and let me explain. If you start off with a low poly mesh in, let's say, Maya, and it's clean and it's UV'd and it's all ready to go, right? But you want high poly detail on that low poly model. You can then make a model in ZBrush that has crazy high poly count, and you don't have to retopo it because you're retopoing it for the purpose of having a low poly model, and you already did that in Maya, right? So that's what I meant by going from low to high or from high to low. However, if you just start from scratch in ZBrush, you don't have anything else, and you created a high poly model, but you want to, for example, texture it in ZBrush and then texture it in Substance Painter and then take it into a game engine, you don't have a low poly model, right? So then you have to retopo your high poly model in order to create the low poly model. Yeah. So that's what that process is for. Alternatively, and that is something that I hear much less, is even if you have a low poly model, if you are like really, really specific about it and you want to clean up your edge flow in your high poly or your low poly, then you can do it as well. Let's say on your low poly model process, you're not too concerned about the topology, right? You just, being creative and making whatever. Then you have to optimize and clean up that model for use later on in the pipeline. That could be a reason to take your low poly model and retopo the low poly model. If you got any questions on this, let me know, because I know this can get complicated fast. Let's see. Does 3ds Max have retopo tools too? Yes. Let's see. Okay, I saw that. Compulsory. Any do's and don'ts in workflows? Well, first of all, there are a couple of obvious things, right? One of the obvious things is whatever you do in whatever software you're doing it, do it properly, right? Don't create rubbish and have to go back in again and again and again and fix it and fix it and fix it. The reason why I'm saying that is people will create a model and then put it online on ArtStation or social media, right? And they'll say, hey, give me some feedback on my model. And then people will say, hey, the topology isn't great and everything. And then people will say, yeah, but I'm going to go back and fix that. Well, if you're going to go back and fix that, then don't share it, right? Just do it right the first time. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, let's see. Nestor is saying a model. Okay, so Nestor had a question about hard surface modeling. Now, the thing with hard surface is that a lot of people are confused about the definition of that. My definition of hard surface modeling is anything that is not organic, right? So an animal is organic modeling, a human is organic modeling, a fantasy character is organic modeling. What is hard surface modeling? Cars, tables, tools, objects. Now, the problem there, though, is that's why there's confusion. You can have organic shapes in hard surface models and vice versa. You can have a character wearing armor, where the armor would be hard surface modeling, the character itself would be organic modeling. So it depends on what your definition is of hard surface modeling. Okay, textile density, right? The thing about that is that when you're looking at a mesh, right, the density is important for a couple of things. One, and that would be more the what's the right word? Let me think about how I'm going to explain this. If you look at the textile density, it's important that it's uniform, right? As much as possible within a certain texture area. So you can have a model that has low poly on the arms, for example, but high poly in the face. The density determines how good your texture will look and whether it's warped and stretched. And yeah, so I don't know what you mean by any concept for, but that's what I know about it. Video on the plugins. I did a video on all of these plugins. Yeah, so check my channel. What's the difference between Bacon and Marmoset Toolbag and Substance Painter? I mean, about the difference is I used to use Bacon Substance, but Marmoset number. I'm trying to see what you're saying here. Okay. Yeah, I know, and I realize that not all of you are native English speakers, so I'm just trying to read between the lines to understand what you're saying. So basically, you're saying, what's the difference between baking and Marmoset and the Substance Painter? The technology behind baking maps isn't really different. It's just a different software manufacturer, right? Substance Painter, since recent, has the option to UV things for you, although I don't think that is great, but it's obviously a requirement that your model is UV'd before you can do that. Other than that, there are a whole bunch of applications out there that will allow you to bake maps. You can do it in Maya, you can do it in 3ds Max, you can do it in Marmoset Toolbag, 3D Coat, all of these programs, yeah? Which one should you use? The one you like best, I would say. I don't hear a lot of people saying this one is better than that one, so. Let's see, I want to make low poly models, but eventually the poly count increases. What is the strategy for making good models with low poly count? Okay, well, the thing is this. The reason why low polys tend to become high poly models is because there's a lack of planning. If you know up front what you're going to model because you have a reference or concept piece or whatever, right? You literally think about, okay, where is my topology going? If you have a character, you know, how much poly count do I need for the head, for the body, for the armor? What can I do with normal maps? What do I need to put into the low poly model? So this is planning. Most people don't plan that. They just start to model and they see I'm missing something here. So they add an edge line, I'm missing something there. And as they do so, it becomes bigger and bigger. You can get away with things like that, but you would have to retopo it when you're done. And if you do it, you know, first way around, it saves you a lot of money. Let's see, low to high project all, high to low is retopo. Well, not high to low. Well, let me put it this way. If you have a low poly model that is UV'd, you can take that and turn it into a high poly model and you wouldn't need retopo, correct? If you only have a high poly model and nothing else, then yes, you would have to retopologize to create the low poly model. Let's see, if you change your silhouette a lot with the high poly retopo, must be smart too. Yeah, okay, with silhouette, I assume, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying here. Yeah, true. And for me personally, that's why I like to create my low poly model first. If you use ZBrush sculpts for tiling textures, you don't need to retopo. Yep. Let's see. Oh, hang on. I'm trying not to jump. Okay, let's see. What's a workflow for environmental modeling for games? Well, that kind of depends whether you are creating the environment in a game engine or outside of a game engine. If you're creating it outside of a game engine, it's basically the same principle as creating props, where you go into the game engine, you import your models, you import your textures, possibly bake lights and so on, and then you combine them. Right, says you have to go. Yeah, you have an amazing day too. Thank you. Can you do tutorial on how to avoid pinching in the corners while sharpening the edges? Okay, so sharpening the edges, right? First of all, I don't know what your process is to sharpen the edges. There are a couple of methods you can do this. You can harden the normals. You can use the crease. You can add bevels. How does that pinch? I don't understand where that pinching is coming from, because I assume when you do this, you're doing this manually. You're not having the system do it for you, right? Let's see, Photoshop. Hey Shane, how you doing? Photoshop export plugin in Substance Painter. What do you think about it? Well, I haven't used it yet, to be honest. I know that Substance Painter is now owned by Adobe. I do export ZBrush models with all the composition maps into Photoshop. There's a plugin there as well that works quite well. I haven't tried going from Photoshop to Substance Painter though, so I'll definitely check that out. Let's see. Do I still retopo in Maya using Quad Draw, or are people using the automatic remeshing? The thing about this is automatic remeshing is kind of like remesher in ZBrush, right? The thing is, if I am in need of a remeshed model, then I want to do it manually because I want to have full control over edge flow for the purpose of whatever the model is going to be used for. But like I said earlier, that's why I personally use TopoGun. TopoGun is a standalone application. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's free. I had it such a long time. I don't know if it's still free. Anyway, that is my go-to. I really love that. But I usually try to avoid retopo altogether because, like I said, I start with my low poly in Maya, and then I go into ZBrush. Okay, let's see. Can I make a video how to make a curvature map from a normal map? Well, typically, if you are baking in, let's say, I don't know, Substance Painter, the curvature map will be made for you, right? And it kind of depends on what type of application you're using. But I normally would not make a curvature map from a normal map. Let's see, follow-up question. If I'm going to render a character or object for a quick animation, what should be my target poly count? Okay, right. Well, first of all, ZBrush poly count. The ZBrush isn't a poly count. It's like a kind of a pixel count, not necessarily a poly count, right? So you can't really compare that. For a quick animation, I mean, I don't know what you mean by quick animation, but let's say you have, I don't know, a 1 minute animation, right? And you're working in, I don't know, Maya, and I would just do a quick play blast just to have a look, right? So if you want to have a nice render because you have to show it to a client or something like that, it's all depending on your system resources. It's depending on whether you're using a render farm or not. And it's also depending on what the final animation and where it's going to be used. Is it for a TV commercial? Is it for something online? And again, that has an effect on how big the file can be and so forth. Yeah. Victor, let's see. If we work for portfolio, we have to retopo the model or just enough ZBrush sculpt and poly paint it? Well, and I know I'm saying that depends a lot, but it does depend because and I talked about this before, your portfolio is basically your resume, right? So you create a portfolio for a specific reason. You want people to look at the portfolio and say, hey, this guy is good and I want to hire them and so forth. So you want to show off your skills. Now, if you show a poly painted render out of ZBrush, I don't know whether you did a low poly or not. I don't know whether you know how to bake maps. I don't know whether you work in Substance Painter. I don't know any of that. Maybe you did all of it in ZBrush, right? So if you want people to have that information because that's how you explain your skills, I would include an image of the low poly model. I would include an image of the UV map. I would show everything I wanted the client or the studio to know in order for them to hire me. Yeah. Does Topogun help in hard surface models? Topogun is Topogun. It's designed to re-topologize basically any model. Let's see. As a beginner achieving a good topology, is it all about software-based practice, or can I read theoretical concepts? Well, there are a couple of baselines here when it comes to topology, right? Now, think of, let's say you are taking a balloon, right? You inflate a balloon with air, and then you take tiles like on a bathroom wall, right? And you start to paste them onto this balloon. If the tiles are too big, then the balloon will no longer be round once you're done, right? If they're too small, you have unnecessary high poly count. But even worse, if some are big and some are small, you get deformation in the surface, and also the texture doesn't know, what's what, as far as responding to light, as far as responding to curvature and that kind of thing. So it's important that topology is consistent. That doesn't mean that it has to have the same density everywhere. Like I said before, a character model might have a lot of topology around the mouth or a lot of poly count around the mouth, but maybe not so much in the arms. So again, the rule here is, what is it going to be used for? It's always good practice to have clean topology, but let's say you made a 3D crate, and you're going to render it out in ZBrush, and you're going to have a photo or basically a render of a crate, and you're done. It's not going to be used in any application anywhere. That's just it. How important is that topology? Well, technically, for that purpose, not so much. Maybe with the exception of the textures. But it's good practice to always get it right. Yeah? Okay, let's see. Pretty much I manually add edge loops and clean the topology or bevel the edges. Sometimes the shading looks like there's a diagonal line across the face of the corner. Okay, if that's the case, then you most likely don't have a clean topology. I would look into other methods than adding geometry. So, for example, the crease tool. Love from India. Yeah, namaste. How are you? If you do the smooth for low poly model, it looks like a different model. So should I smooth the low poly model? Well, again, it depends on your workflow. I hit 3 on my keyboard all the time in Maya because I want to have an idea what it's going to look like once I'm done. Yeah, it doesn't mean that I'm going to actually smooth the model in Maya. I just want to see what it would look like if it's smooth. If I want to keep the low poly, I would not actually smooth it, just do a preview, and then I would go into another application and make my high poly. If you already have saved out your low poly and you want to take a copy of that to work towards your high poly, then I would actually smooth it out. Let's see, how to make a scene that's large in scale, where to start and how to finish. How to set us. Okay. So the thing is this, when you're working in scale, and I assume you're talking about something like maybe a city or whatever, yeah? First of all, most artists work modular. So they will have a modular system for buildings and whatnot, and they will work procedural, right? So they have a database of, 500 buildings, and then they have a procedural script set up that will populate your environment with those buildings as a reference. So I'm trying to understand what your question is about. If you're talking about the actual scale of your scene, yes, you can go into, for example, Maya and say, I want every grid square to be a meter or a millimeter. The reason why that's important is that lighting in Maya is based on real life situations. So if you create a living room based on a scale of millimeters, and your living room is 1 by 1 millimeter, and you activate a light, you have a huge amount of light in a very, very small space. So whenever you're doing interiors or buildings, I say it's always good to model the scale. Yeah. Now let's see, what's good software in 3D? The best software in 3D is the software you have. I mean, the whole debate about using Blender or Maya or 3ds Max, people go over and over it, and you know, it's just whatever you are skilled with. That said, Maya tends to be used by people in the entertainment industry, so movies and games. 3ds Max more towards architectural use, interiors, that kind of thing. Blender is a free application. It's kind of used for all sorts of things. And then what I hear less often is Cinema 4D. Let's see, do I have any online courses available? Yeah, I have 1,200 free tutorials on my YouTube channel. Let's see, I feel like I spend a lot of time on things that could go faster and or others are faster in their workflow. Okay, that's a good question. Well, the thing is that a lot of 3D artists, especially when they're new, is they focus on the wrong things, yeah? Because what happens is they start working in Maya, for example, and instead of learning the basic functionality of the software, they want to get up and running as fast as possible. So 2 days in, they're trying to model something super complex. Problem is the base mesh is not okay, the topology is not okay, the edge flow is not okay, and you're fixing problems and you're pinning yourself into a corner all the time because you never took the time to learn it properly. Yeah, I'm not saying that's your situation, but that happens a lot. So it's really important that you do things step by step in the right order. Make sure you master something before you move on to the next. Yeah. Can I quickly summarize my workflow from start to finish to produce a 3D asset? Example, okay. All right, so I talked a little bit about this, but I'll give you an example. I typically work on props. And it can be either props for games or movies, or, for example, products that are going to be produced or not produced yet, or toy design or something like so on. Yeah. So what I do first, let's say we have a product that I need to create in 3D. Okay, I'll talk to the client about their concept work, their reference material. Do they have any color styles? Do they have a concept, or are they still working on ideas? Yeah. Once they have it clear what they want, I start to gather all the reference material for that. Color schemes, color numbers, so specific, so I know exactly what color it should be, dimensions, everything I can find. From there, I will block it out, or I will give some concepts back to the client and say it would look something like this. Client says, okay, cool. Then I will go into, for example, Maya. I will create my low poly. If they only need a final render and nothing else, I would only create a high poly, right? And then I would probably texture it in Keyshot or ZBrush. If they do need a low poly and a high poly, there we go, different workflow. Then I would do low poly in Maya, UV in Maya. Then I would color ID mask in Maya. Then I would save out the low poly. I would take my low poly as a copy into ZBrush. I would bump up the density. I would add detail through sculpting, save out the hard poly, the high poly model out of ZBrush, take them both into, for example, Substance Painter, bake all my maps from my high poly onto my low poly, then export the low poly model again, export all the baked maps out of Substance Painter, and then, for example, import them into either a game engine or back into Maya, apply the textures, set up the lighting, set up the rendering, and render it out. That's a lot. Let's see here. Ricardo, hi. Hi, Ricardo, how are you? Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to get a 3D portfolio, but I don't have a Maya license anymore since I left school. Do you know how I could continue? Yeah, Mr. B, first of all, the price of Maya went down drastically. Up until about a year ago, it was something like $400 a month. Now you can get a full use commercial license in Maya for approximately $350 a year, right? So really affordable. If you want to continue to work with Maya, and I, obviously would advise you to do so, it's a really affordable situation now. If not, you can switch to Blender because that's completely free, and then you can work with that. Let's see. This is a language that I can't read, so I'm not going to do that. What's the best job in 3D? That's impossible to answer. Based on what? Based on the amount of money you can make, based on whether the work is fun or not, based on how easy it is to find a job or not, and so on. Yeah. Let's see. Can I tell us how to bake high poly to low poly in Substance without exploding mesh in Maya to get clean curvature and less artifacts? Well, you basically already answered your own question. Yeah. For those of you who don't know what that is, if you have components touching each other, right? Let's say you made a weapon in Maya and you take it into Substance Painter for baking, you will see black edges on the lines where it's touching. Yeah. So what you would normally do is go into Maya, you would have all the parts of that weapon come apart. Based on them being apart, you would bake the maps and then you would put them back together again. That's how that works. One thing you can do is you can combine it into one solid mesh if you don't have to animate or deform the individual components. That way you get a much cleaner bake. So that's one thing you could try if you have that option. Let's see. What's the best program for textures and materials? Applying them or creating them? Let me know. Let's say I'm trying modeling in before. Okay, how to improve 3D skills. Practice, 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 practice. Okay, so do I have any video that explains how blockout works? I heard the term, but don't understand it. Right, well, the thing about blockout, and again, different people have different definitions. Blockout basically can mean, okay, I got this scene set up, right? I don't know. Let's say a theme park, an amusement park, and I need to model that, right? And I haven't started yet. What I would do is I would say, okay, so the popcorn stand is over there, and I would just make a cube to represent the popcorn stand, right? And then I would say, okay, the merry-go-round is going to be over there, so I'll take a simple flat cylinder to represent that. That will give me an idea of spacing. How much room do I have between the individual elements? Do I need to move stuff around? Is the scaling right? And so forth. That can be blocking out. Other option of blocking out is if you are doing test animations. If you look at Monsters, Inc., for example, they would have super low poly, very rough, blocked out models for Sully, right? Without any textures, nothing, purely to do test animations. Is this the movement I want? Do I want it, and this will save you a lot of time because you can move much, much faster. And once you have everything set up correctly, you can then reference the blocked image out with the original. Yeah. Let's see. All right. Maya Lite is pretty cheap. I don't use Maya Lite. It's very limited, I hear, and it's very much focused on the game industry. But like I said, Maya, full commercial license, indie license, under $400 a year, I think that's very affordable. Let's see, what's the best workflow for painting and substance. We paint high poly model or low poly model, and what preset do you usually use for exporting the texture? Okay, so for exporting the texture. Okay. Alrighty. Well, the thing is this: what you're doing in Substance Painter is you're painting based on your UVs. So if you haven't UV'd your model, even though Substance Painter now will UV it for you, sort of, yeah, you are painting on your UVs. So that is the workflow, yeah? And the high poly is brought in to bake the normal map and the curvature map and that kind of stuff. And that will help you, that will help you to, hang on, I was reading something at the same time, sorry. Let's see. Yeah, and that will help you to look at the curvature maps and all the other maps. So you're painting on the UV of the low poly map, yeah? Let's see. Wait, how much is Maya over a year? For one full year, it's less than $400 US. Maya 1 costs 10,000 per module. That doesn't make sense. Let's see. My PC is not so strong, so how to improve its performance for 3D artists? All right. So when it comes to PCs, it's kind of like that comment where they say, "What's the weakest link in the chain?" 3D artists use a lot of CPU power, right? So your central processing unit power. A lot of people think that the workhorse is the GPU or your video card. Not necessarily. A lot of render applications still use CPU, yeah? Now, rendering is only part of your workflow, although it's an important one. When you're modeling and you are opening up a scene that has, a poly count of 1.5 million, you might even crash your CPU even before your GPU got started, right? So I wouldn't spend all my money on a GPU. I wouldn't spend all my money on a CPU. I would find the correct balance. For me, the correct balance right now, although I have a killer GPU, right? For me, the balance would be CPU is number 1, RAM and memory is number 2, and GPU is number 3. That said, if you are using a super cheap GPU, you're killing the performance of your CPU. So try to find the balance there, yeah? Okay, so blocking out in hard surface modeling is pretty much the process that I explained. How to get a job as an FX lighting TD in a good studio. That is a little bit too off topic and it would take too much time, but I recently did a live stream on that. So definitely check that out. Most used brushes in ZBrush, that would be the Move tool, the Trim Dynamic tool, the Standard brush, the Clip Curve brush, and yeah, that's about it, I would say, these 4. So Move, Trim Dynamic, Standard, and Clip Curve. That's what I use most. And then, of course, smoothing out. I do 3D modeling on Maya, and I need to apply texture or material, and I don't know what is a simple way and the best way to apply it. Okay, Nadine, you definitely need to check out my videos on texturing because that is way too complex to quickly explain. There's a whole process there, and it all depends on what you're using it for. Is Unity 3D useful for 3D artists? Obviously, I mean, Unity 3D is a game engine environment, and a lot of people are now creating environments in game engine environments. So yeah, if you are working on games, sure. What's the base salary for beginner 3D artists working at a larger company? Okay, and again, that is pretty much off topic, but that said, first, what do you mean by beginner? Is this somebody that just started in 3D, or somebody that just, finished college with a master's degree? And then in what country do you live, and what specific area you're looking for? That can be anything from an intern fee of a couple of hundred a month to, I don't know, 25,000, depending on, where you're starting out. And again, we're talking about somebody that's beginning and that kind of thing. When your PC isn't powerful enough for you to work smarter and more optimized, obviously there's a limit, but I found starting on a super old computer helped me to work smarter. Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of things you can do. I mean, you can split up your scene in sections, okay? Let's say you have a big scene. Don't open the entire scene, just open individual sections of that scene and work that way. You can render individual passes and compile them later on instead of doing that straight up. And these all are things that will help. Is it possible for 3D animator in other 3D skill? Is it possible for a 3D animator, not expert in other 3D skills like modeling, etc., to work as a freelancer? Oh, absolutely. I mean, animators are highly sought after. And the fact that you only know animating because it's animating isn't a huge problem. If you know enough about it so you can talk to a rigger or talk to a modeler and understand what they're doing, that's fine. All right, more cores or faster CPU. The important thing here is multi-thread. So multi-core, multi-thread. But again, there's a balance. If I had to choose between a multi-core i3, right, or a less core i7, I would go with an i7, obviously. Yeah. Let's see, how to improve modeling skills, practice. How to make anything, modeling tricks and tips. Okay, like I said, I have like 1,200 videos on my channel, so if you check that out, you should be good. Yeah. Do you need to have a degree? Well, no, you don't. Does it help if you have a degree? Absolutely. It does. The thing with the degree is, if there's a job opening at a studio, they will typically get 50 or 100 resumes. If you want to stand out and you're the one without the degree, that's not helping, right? So if you can get a degree, get one. If you don't have one and you want to compete with people that do, that means that your work needs to be solid and potentially even better, right? So anything that can help you to improve that situation is something you would need to go for. But if you don't have a degree and you can't get one, it doesn't mean you're excluded from the industry. I mean, it's doable. Yeah, you can use the render layers. Yeah, that'll make it more efficient for sure. Do I do game development? Not directly. I work for and with people that create games. I will create props for them and so forth, but I'm not a game guy myself. Let's see. How to make complex shapes. I did a series on that on my channel where I specifically talk about how to make complex shapes. Hey, Alan, how are you? Fashionably late. That's okay. I was just wondering, where's Alan at? But glad you made it. Let's see. Where can I find lighting tutorials? Try my channel. I practice, but I don't get results. Okay, so if that's the case, then I think you need to wonder what the thing you're practicing, if that's the right thing to practice. But again, there are thousands of tutorials out there. So try to look at beginners videos, follow along with those videos. And once you are able to, I don't know, make a coffee cup by yourself, right? Try to make different models, switch up the shape, switch up the ears, and so forth. It's all about putting in the time and practice, okay? Should you remesh or increase resolution of ZBrush model before UV unwrapping it and importing it into Substance Painter? Well, first of all, your model in ZBrush is typically not what you are going to import in Substance Painter. You typically use ZBrush to create your high poly model, where your low poly model is the one you want to import. The high poly model is only being retopoed in order for you to create a low poly model. So let me read this again. Should you remesh or increase resolution of ZBrush model before UV unwrapping? You're not UV unwrapping the high poly model. You're UV unwrapping the low poly model. Yeah. Let's see. What would be the best category of work to get into as a general 3D artist? ArchViz is an area where there's a lot of work, so you can definitely check that out. Interiors, exteriors for project development, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's a good area. Let's see. Sorry, I did not hear this correctly. Where can I find lighting tutorials of Maya? On a YouTube channel called MH Tutorials, which is my YouTube channel. Let's see here. All right, is Blender enough for motion designer? I would say no. Is there any way to apply texture from Substance to a model? To apply textures from Substance Painter to a model automatically? Not that I know of, no. Let's see. Is making foggy environment, is it better using AI fog or a standard volume? It's not better, it's not worse, it's just a different way. How many hours should you work? Okay, that kind of depends on what your goal is. I mean, if you want to make a living as a freelance artist, then you put in the number of hours you need to put in to pay the bills, right? And especially when you're starting off, that can be a lot. And you can be working 100 hours a week, easy. I did so many, many years. I mean, I now have a solid client base. I can do things, you know, a bit, I would say slower, but I can pick and choose kind of projects that I want to work on. And yeah, it takes a long time to build up that network. You need to be professional. You need to do your work well, and just continue to do so over time. And that will build, you know, build up your client base. Okay. Okay, guys, I have another 2 minutes or so. I got a premiere video that's going live in 10 minutes, and I need to be there for live chat. It's a ZBrush video, so if you want to check that out, please do so. And yeah, let's see. Okay, any good Substance Painter alternatives? Yeah, you have Quixel, you have Mari, you have a 3D Coat, several, yeah. Okay, guys, let me do one more question. Okay, so let's see. One beginning as a freelancer, how do you charge for render time? Okay, now, for those of you who don't know, I have a 10-part free video series on my channel. It's all about how to become a freelance artist. Anything and everything about that. So contract, sales, pricing, everything and everything, yeah? So before I go, please, guys, check out this website. This website is a conference that's going to be online on April 30th. I am the head of the event production for that. I'm also one of the speakers. Several other very cool speakers will be in that event. So if you are into environmental modeling as a 3D artist, definitely check that out. It's a free event. You can sign up there. And yeah, cool. Okay, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate that. If you want to check out my premiere video in 12 minutes, maybe I'll see you there. I'll be live chatting along with it, and it's in ZBrush, and it's about how to hand sculpt wooden planks in ZBrush. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. See you guys next time. Bye.